Hi there, happy hump day, and it's Wednesday. So, today I'm going to get you to think back to your childhood, and you may remember a fairy tale that was written by Hans Christian Andersen titled The Emperor Has No Clothes. So, if you recall, or if you haven't heard of it, what it centered on was two conmen. And what they did was they convinced the emperor that they could create for him the finest suit in the land. But there was a catch. The catch being the only people who could see this amazing suit were intelligent. And of course, no one wanted to admit to the emperor that they weren't intelligent, that they weren't smart. And so no one spoke up, no one questioned, no one said, hang on, what's going on here? The emperor doesn't have any clothes on. It was only when he was parading down the street where a young boy then spoke up and said he isn't wearing anything at all. Now, with all fairy tales, there was a moral to the story. The weavers preyed on the emperor's vanity and also preyed on the fact that they didn't think people would feel comfortable to speak up, to question, because people don't like looking stupid. So in a modern day context, in big organisations, this fairy tale still has applicability. We're tribal creatures. We all want to feel like we fit in. We want to feel like we belong. We want to feel like we're part of the pack. And that means that there's many occasions where it's easy for us to follow the crowd rather than be sidelined and left out. This pressure to conform means we hold back. We don't speak up when perhaps we should. We don't challenge the status quo if people around us aren't challenging the status quo. And we can make decisions merely because of the fact that everybody else is doing the same thing. Now, in behavioural economics, this is seen as the herd mentality, and it plays out all the time in the share market. When the share price for a company goes up, people rush to the market to go and buy. When it falls, people rush to sell. And often there's no logic to the action apart from the fact that everybody else is doing it. So people then worry that if everybody else is doing it, then I should be doing that too. So this seemingly irrational behaviour demonstrates how the choices of a larger group can influence the choices of an individual. But curiously, it goes even further than that. So the University of Leeds, they did a study, and what they found is that humans, we flock, a bit like sheep and birds do. Now you kind of might go, wow, how is that even possible? But what they did was they ran a study, and people were asked to move through a hall, and they were walking around, but there were a select group of people who had been given specific instructions about where to walk. The other people, the only instructions they had been given was they were told to wander around the hall, and they weren't allowed to communicate with anybody else that was in the hall. What they found was that the people who were given the specific instructions as to where to wander, it didn't take long before the rest of the people who didn't have those instructions to start following the people with the instructions. And so over a very short period of time, there was a distinct pattern of where people were walking in that hallway. So what we find is that similarly in organisations, when organisations are facing increased complexity, they need people who are willing to challenge, willing to question, willing to not just follow what everybody else is doing, but to really dig into what it is that they need to do differently. Because if you've got people around you who are just blindly following what everybody else is doing, then that means you're going to be missing opportunities to make change in a way that you need to make change. And look, it's really hard sometimes in organisations to play the role of the skeptic, to put on what Edward de Bono would call the black hat, to be the one that is challenging, the one that is questioning when everybody else around you is agreeing. So if you're in a leadership role, what becomes really important for you is to create that safe environment. The environment where people can challenge, where they can question, where people are really encouraged to think differently, to ask questions, to be curious. And if they don't understand something, to ask, to dig into it, to make sure that all the facts and the data and the emotional points are on the table. Of course, it can be easier to let silence reign, but when you let silence reign, what you're creating is an environment where dissent goes underground, ideas go underground, and things aren't challenged. And in an environment where we know that we need to get things done, to make progress, that means we need an environment where people feel safe to ask questions and to challenge. A quick agreement may not be the best agreement that you need. So recognize that there's going to be times where you need either yourself or the people around you to say, hey, the emperor's got no clothes. Good food for thought for this week. And I'll see you next week. Take care.